Netanyahu blamed Hamas and the Palestinian Authority for spreading lies that incited the attack and ordered the demolition of the attackers' homes and the homes of other Palestinian terrorists who had carried out recent attacks. President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority condemned the attack, the first time he's condemned an attack in this recent rash of violence. Hamas, on the other hand, praised today's attack, telling NBC News, "We congratulate this operation and ask our people to revenge and to do more attacks against Israelis. This is a normal action against the enemy." Joining me now by phone from Jerusalem is Sheera Frenkel, the Middle East correspondent for BuzzFeed News. Also joining us, NBC News foreign correspondent Ayman Mohideen. Sheera Frenkel, what is the situation in Jerusalem now?
People are tense. They're worried that this is just going to be the first of many attacks, ongoing attacks in Jerusalem. I spoke to parents earlier today who told me that they were keeping their children out of school tomorrow because they're worried that actually both sides might attack and that this is just going to escalate further.
Ayman, Palestinian Authority condemns the attack. Hamas congratulates.
Yeah, two very different narratives. Obviously, Hamas is seen by Israel as a terrorist organization, and at the same time, Hamas has been fighting over the course of the last several years very much against Israel by using these types of tactics, terrorist tactics, and continues to call for them. They believe in their eyes what they call as armed resistance is the only way for the Palestinian people to achieve their independence. Obviously, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority very much disagreeing with that, still believe in negotiations and a peace process, and that's why they condemned it.
And Sheera Frenkel, what has Benjamin Netanyahu said about Israeli reaction to this?
He's asked Israelis to be restrained about their actions going forward. He's asked vigilantes not to take actions and not to take matters into their own hands. That's something Israel has seen in the past. They've seen these kind of vigilante acts of revenge targeting Palestinians, and he's worried about that happening again. He's also asked his own member of parliament not to visit the site known as Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Temple Mount, fearing that that's going to inflame tensions further. And for people to just be aware, report for the suspicious things, he's basically making a call to people to calm things. He knows that this is not something that the Israeli police can calm on their own. They've seen these sort of random, what they call lone wolf attacks. And he's hoping that by calming tensions across the board that he'll be able to sort of de-escalate the situation.
Ayman, trace the history for us of this conflict at Temple Mount.
Well, it goes back to 1967 during the Six-Day War when Israel occupied East Jerusalem and particularly the Old City. As you mentioned, it is one of the holiest sites for all three major religions in this world. Since then, it has been under the custodianship of the Jordanian authorities, although it is controlled physically by Israel. But there has been a status quo rule, which is effectively allowing Muslim worshippers to pray at the noble sanctuary. Jewish worshippers are allowed to pray around the noble sanctuary of the Temple Mount. They're not allowed to actually pray inside or on the top of the Temple Mount as they see it. But in recent weeks, the Israeli government, as you mentioned, or the Israeli parliament, was trying to introduce legislation. There were calls by right-wing Israelis that they wanted to change that rule to allow Jewish worshippers into the noble sanctuary and to pray on top of the Temple Mount. That obviously led to this latest round of tensions. The Jordanian government withdrew their ambassador at the time. Secretary of State John Kerry flew to the region to try and negotiate some kind of agreement. And we heard from the Israeli officials trying to calm the situation down by saying they are not going to change the status quo, that the status quo would remain in place. But in the past several years, the restrictions on Muslim worshippers into the noble sanctuary has become increasingly difficult. They've limited who can go in and who can't go in to pray for Muslims, and that has just continued to build up that tension.
Sheera, it sounds like to some extent that the Israelis are trying to preserve a status quo while also slightly adjusting the status quo over time.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen a shift. It's become, if not mainstream, at least more acceptable for Jewish politicians, Israeli politicians in the Knesset, to openly call for Jews to be able to pray on the Temple Mount. And that's something that we never would have heard 5 or 10 years ago. The groups of Jewish visitors as well who go there and who try to sort of make some sort of sneaky prayer, and that's something I saw myself. They bend down to the floor, pretend to tie their shoelaces, and actually mutter a prayer. Those little acts that they see as rebellion are viewed as incredibly disrespectful by Muslims who are And so we've seen an increase in this, and that's just kind of gradually escalated things to the point that we've gotten to today.
Eamon, what's your judgment about what the next step might be? Where might we be on this a week from now?
Well, it's going to really depend on the leadership from both sides. Friday is always a big day, obviously, in Jerusalem. It is the holy day for Muslims. A lot of thousands of Palestinians will attempt to try to enter the mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, for prayers. But it also will come down to the Israeli authorities and whether or not they are going to attempt to destroy and demolish the homes of these two Palestinians in recent days, or they're going to try to push that down the road. I mean, keep in mind, when the Israelis killed the Palestinian teenager, the Palestinian-American teenager this summer, the Israeli authorities did not go destroy the homes of the Israeli perpetrators. So you can see why, when Israel is now going to destroy the homes of these Palestinian attackers, there's going to be a lot of anger, and perhaps that could once again trigger another round of violence. But right now on the Palestinian side, there's a disconnect between the Palestinian leadership and the people on the streets. They're not necessarily responsive to the calls of calm that may be coming out of the Palestinian Authority.
Eamon Mohideen and Sheera Frenkel, thank you both for joining me tonight.